Rock and roll came about from the ashes of World War II and had a major impact on society, evident from the effect it had on teenagers. The effect rock and roll had on Australia, however, was rather limited. However, occasional individuals and groups did certainly make a name for themselves, along with countless rock groups and singers from America to Britain to Sweden. But what was the cause of all this rock craze? Well, most people would say World War II. But what made up the rock ideology? Well, anti-authoritarianism, of course. But what did the establishment think of these new rockers? Well, they thought it was absolute, complete and utter bollocks. But let's talk about the teenagers. Where did these strange beasts come from? They weren't even a thing before 1940s. People in their teens back then were only supposed to get a job and get married for men, and get married and have children for women. But then, as the rock and roll movement came through, as parents tried to give their children pleasures in the form of money, time, and education, and allowing them not to have to deal with wars and conflicts of the past, the perfect conditions occurred. They were now able to buy, believe it or not, rock albums. For goodness sake. Not only this, but as the craze got larger, radio stations were also playing them, much to the outrage of the establishment. All of this, in turn, led to teenagers being able to experience the cultural influences of rock and roll, to go out to parties and have a lot more freedom in their lives. During the earlier stages of the whole rock and roll time in the mid-20th century, there was a lot of what most people would say negative effects on teenagers. This included things like high amounts of strong and often violent and erotic partying, heavier binge drinking, large amounts of recreational drug use, and with the introduction of the pill, far more sexual interaction as well. This was all due to rock and roll's idea of breaking free from the boring older generation and adopting a doing whatever we want to and a never getting old outlook on life. It was very much an anarchist thinking process, but it became very popular. And a side note, throughout this period the word cool was popularized. Now that's cool. This rock ideology was the thing of the time. Most people all over the world had gotten into it. However, the dangers of such a lifestyle became clear in the 1960s when many rock stars, which were key on keeping the genre alive, passed away. The worst case was the death of the king of rock, Elvis Presley. All the deaths led to a time of reformation and rethinking in rock and roll, and causing its popularity to plummet, only to be recovered around the early 70s and reaching heights only again in the 1980s. Many say that a large part of the revival was due to the breath of fresh air that Queen was. By the 80s, a lot of the drug use, heavy drinking, etc. had decreased to a much lower level, meaning that less people died, meaning rock went on strong, until about a decade later, when in the 90s and the noughties, when rock was shadowed by new forms of music like rap, techno, party, dubstep, and hip-hop, leading to an eventual decline in rock and roll's popularity. Back to the start of rock and roll, the outrage that the younger generation had caused the establishment was massive. People were out partying, having very revealing clothing for that time anyway, performing what was seen as vulgar and sexual dancing, and listening to what was commonly known as the devil's music, rock and roll. Frank Sinatra posted an article about how much he hated Elvis Presley and rock, saying, "Rock and roll is the most brutal, ugly, degenerate, vicious form of expression, lewd, sly, and in plain fact dirty, a rancid-smelling aphrodisiac and martial music every sideburned delinquent on the face of the earth." Many of the older generation had similar thoughts on Frank Sinatra, but those of the establishment who at least saw it as an art form, which is what it was, considered it's less mature and serious, and thought of it as children's art and like scribbles, as compared to the refined masterpiece that was the older generation's classical music. All in all, it was considered the music that would corrupt society, and thus there was a lot of criticism for the genre. That said, it was the younger generation who died last, so it's fair to say that they won the argument. The establishment, or the older generation, truly thought of rock and roll as the devil. The establishment, or older generation, truly thought of rock and roll was the music from the establishment or older generation truly thought that rock and roll was the music from the devil and from hell, often with good reason. The dance moves at the time and the rock and roll lifestyle were all quite controversial. However, with it came a lot of freedom and joy in a younger generation. All of this was one of the many byproducts of the Second World War, strengthening the statement that no other event in history has had a greater impact than that of World War II. Rock and roll is truly no exception. It changed hearts, minds of everybody, and thus it truly changed the world.